This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I have an amazing guest today, Sandra Champlain. Hello, Sandra.
Oh, Heather, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, it's so great to have you. And Sandra is the host of We Don't Die Radio, which I'm very familiar with. I'm less familiar with Shades of the Afterlife, so we'll talk about some of that coming up as we go throughout these episodes. But you were a skeptic when it came to a lot of these things, the afterlife, near-death experiences, that sort of thing. But now you are talking about them all the time. You're doing all kinds of research. So why don't you take us on your journey from skeptic to where you are today?
I'd be happy to. And I do talk a lot. So you just break
I
right
love
in
that.
if you need to. Well, I wasn't just a skeptic, but I was like a nasty skeptic. For some reason, being a young person back in the day, not only did I think that there was no evidence of life after death, but like you talk a lot about near-death experiences. To me, that was just the brain shutting down. I was arrogant. I felt like I knew better, but I didn't have any research, nor did I want to do any research. So I was very opinionated. I don't think you would have liked the old me. I wouldn't like the old me.
Which is surprising because you are so nice and so thoughtful and so caring. So,
I mean, I wasn't nasty, but I was always a nice person. But if I'd go into a bookstore and I'd see people looking at the spiritual section, I'd think, oh, those poor people, they need to get a life. This is kind of under my breath, but I didn't believe. Now, I was raised Roman Catholic. My parents put us in Catholic school most of my life, but I think that was because there was drugs going on at the mainstream public high school. So I didn't get into religion, even though, I learned it. I know all the prayers. I went to all the classes and everything. But for me, that faith wasn't there. It was more like a nice idea. I grew up, my parents, both great people. Dad is now deceased, but with my mom right here. But we grew up kind of like you have to see it to believe it. There was a local medium in our town, and she really sealed the deal for me that there was nothing there because she'd make all these wild predictions that wouldn't come true. And I think as a young person, I just thought, okay, that stuff is ridiculous. Got to see it to believe it. So somewhere in the mid 90s or so, I was living my life, working hard. I went to culinary school, became a chef. I've been a business owner. My mom and I owned a catering company for over 30 years, catering for race car teams. That was my profession. And due to COVID, the business was closed. But anyways, in my life, I developed this fear of dying. And it seemed to come out of the blue, but it was, like I said, in the mid 90s that I would look up at the stars at night and just be overwhelmed with these questions. Who am I? What is my life for? What happens when I die? And it was really uncomfortable. It was fearful. My mom speculates it's because I had worked in nursing homes in my teenage years of volunteering, and then I learned how to cook from nursing homes. But I used to sit with the senior citizens after my shift was over and hear their stories and hold hands. And I've always been a compassionate person. And then the people would die. So she speculated that it could have been because of that somehow it worked through my subconscious mind. Now, so many years later, I think it's perfect because you take somebody who is a nasty skeptic and then you make them not responsible, but have a passion for learning about the afterlife and sharing it with other people. So I think I'm the perfect messenger. So out of this fear of dying, I very secretly started this crusade to look for any evidence of the afterlife, just to rest my fears, really. And through it, I started with religion, my own religion, Catholicism first, and then went on a journey to study almost all the big major world religions. And just about everybody believes in the afterlife. But to me, that didn't rest my fears. So I had to take it a step further. And I met a lovely lady in one of the classes that I had taken. I've always been somebody taking self-empowerment classes. That's just who I am. And I met this lovely lady named Nancy, nurse, who we got along famously. The one thing, though, that kind of irritated me was she would talk about the afterlife and angels and fairies. And I'm like, oh, Nancy, there's no proof of that. But something just struck a chord with me about her. And as time went on, she and I ended up taking a weekend class where there was a medium that was speaking. And my skeptical mind went into that thinking, there's no way that's possible. But experiencing this demonstration, I was convinced that nobody was planted in the audience because the readings were so genuine and they changed people's lives. I mean, you could see the quality of her details and how it just brings somebody to tears. And it was just, I left there just feeling comforted and uplifted. And even though the cynical side of myself was trying to figure out how somebody could have done that, the part of me that had this incredible fear of death was like, yeah, maybe there's something to this. So I researched this medium. Ended up taking a weekend course in California, lying to everybody in my life that I was going, just on a course, another kind of course, a business course. And in honesty, I was taking a course in mediumship, and it was just a small group of people. And this lady, keep her nameless, she's no longer a practicing medium, but she said, if you're here, you're somebody who can accurately tell the deceased people around others. I'm thinking, that's no way somebody can make that promise. And so she explained a little bit about how we're all mediums, that we all have the gift because we are all souls having a human experience. But sometimes, people are stronger at it than others, just like anybody can learn piano and some people are gifted. And so she gave some of the basics and she says, everybody grab a partner. I knew nobody in the room, Heather, nobody. So this nice lady sat across from me and she said, we're not going to do medium readings now, but I want to show you how it's done. So she says, I just want you to use your imagination. And she says, one of you go first. And I'm like, I'll go first. I can use my imagination. And so she said, just invent that there's somebody standing behind your partner. And she says, if you wanted to create this bubble and just fill the bubble with love and love your partner, that's all good too. And then she says, just tell a story, invent. See, here's the key. She's telling me to invent that there's a person standing there. So I invented this man standing behind this lady. And then with my eyes closed, I started just telling the story. So I invented that it was her grandfather on her mother's side, that his name was Jan, and he was from Denmark. And he had blonde hair and blue eyes and big gap between his front teeth and really windburned skin. And that he worked on a fishing boat. And that, I was getting this thought, of him puffing away on a cigarette and coughing, and that he died of lung cancer. So I've got my eyes closed. I'm telling her the story about Jan and the fishing boat, etc. And then very often there's a message that comes through. And I said, I just felt like he himself was a tough father and never told his daughter, her mother, that he loved her. And could she relay that message? Something simple like that. So I opened my eyes, ready to say, okay, it's your turn. And this girl's crying. This woman, she's an adult. Her grandfather's name was Jan. He was a fisherman in Denmark. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, that gap between his teeth. He died of lung cancer, and he never told his daughter that he loved her. So, Heather, how the heck did I do that if there's no possibility of the afterlife? And that weekend cracked me open to there's more to life than meets the eye, and certainly more to me than I know.
It's an incredible story.
Yeah.
And since then, you've done so much more.
Yeah, they get weirder and more incredible. And then there's some exciting, some not so exciting. But I was now on a quest, again, very secretly, because if people knew that I was studying this, oh my gosh, I'd lose family, I'd lose friends. Yeah. And I had a mainstream job catering for the races with my mom. That we were gone all the time. So I didn't have a lot of time. But this medium weekend really started lifting that fear and this curiosity kind of came out of it. Like, if that's possible, what else is possible? Now, I need to let everybody know I didn't go on to become a medium, because what else happened in that weekend was when I tried to do a good medium reading, I was wrong. But when I used my imagination and I was okay with being wrong, I would be right. So it gave me that opening that this is real. But at that point, and even still today, I don't feel my passion is to become a medium and do one-on-one readings. Instead, like yourself, I want to get to the most amount of people. And that's by having the podcasts and YouTube channel and be able to get to many, 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 many people. So maybe that's not my gift on purpose, right? But I know that it's real. And on the journey, I went to what's called a spiritualist church. It is very similar to another church experience. There's a reading, there's an address, or a sermon of sorts. But at the end of every service, the minister is also a medium and would read the room. And I found out about this because I was curious if I could do anything to improve my medium ability. And at Barnes and Noble, back in the day, I found a book called The Idiot's Guide to Communicating with Spirits. And it was written by Reverend Rita Berkowitz. And not only was she a minister of the spiritualism, but she was an artist. So if you would to attend a reading with her, she would give you evidence of your loved one, but then she'd also draw a picture of them. So spirit artists are a great reason to believe in the afterlife. And I was so fascinated by her book. And when I looked to the back of the book to find out, is there a spiritualist church near me? I found out that she and her church were just 45 minutes away from me. So that was amazing. So I started attending that church. And at one of her church services, there was a husband and wife. Instead of doing the medium readings at the end, they started talking about electronic voice phenomena. And this is using a tape recorder to record sounds like the wind blowing or a shower on or raindrops, and have voices appear on the recording when you replay it. And they played, Heather, a sample of this. They said they both had deceased children from previous marriages. They left their house for about 20 minutes with just a house fan blowing. And when they came back, they said, this is what was on it. And they played it for us. And it was giggles. And it said, Mommy, Daddy, don't be scared. We're still here with you. And everybody could hear it, so it gave me goosebumps. Well, I decided to study, what is this? And there's a great couple called Tom and Lisa Butler who wrote a book, There Is No Death and There Are No Dead. And there I was with my tape recorder, and I was ready to record. And then I freaked myself out. And I said, this is too far, too much. And I put it away. Months later, I found myself burnt out from my job and overeating and stressed and everything. And there's a retreat center in upstate New York called the Omega Center. And I said, I'm going to go there because just nature walks and massages. And there's always some kind of a course. Well, that particular weekend, the only weekend I was free, was Tom and Lisa Butler, Electronic Voice Phenomena. To me, those are breadcrumbs that I can't ignore. I need to follow this path. And so I took the course. I was, scared to death. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But I found there were only 5 other students in the class with me. And Tom and Lisa Butler used to be spiritualist ministers. They're down to earth. They're regular people. They explained that our loved ones can learn from their side how to manipulate energy, and they can rearrange the sound molecules in a voice recorder or a tape recorder. And I know people are doing it now with their iPhones, and this is possible. So I thought, if I could actually hear something and be able to share these messages that way, that I could have a little confidence in sharing my newfound belief that there is an afterlife. So I attend the course, and over the weekend, we were doing these recordings and things, and they played a lot of examples, but there hadn't been anyone in class that had gotten the recordings. And so the night before class ended, it was pouring rain out, and I went back to my cabin by myself, and I imagined that my aunt and uncle and grandparents were standing at the foot of my bed. And I held out that tape recorder, and I said, if you guys are real, and this is real, and I'm supposed to help people believe in the afterlife, I said, I need you to try to talk very loud. And I said, I'm going to let this record for 1 minute and then I'm going to say goodnight. Completely convinced I'm talking to myself. Heather held out that recorder, recorded the raindrops. Good night. Well, when I played it back, the hairs on my body just stood up around counter number 46 on the recording, because I heard something, and then I played it back and I played it back again. And what was on that recording was, good night, Sandra, in a man's voice. Two women say, good night, and then you hear, good night. And I wish I could tell you I was delighted, but I was actually scared to death at that moment, thinking, oh my God, there's this unseen world and there's people. And so I went to bed that night happy, but kind of like freaked out. And then when I went into class the next day, I played it for everybody in class. And they said, that's what you call a class A, where people can hear it, as opposed to, our minds can try to make sounds and different things. But the other people in class had all lost a loved one. And I could see firsthand how much these words made a difference for them in their grief. And I knew that, like, I need to do more of this and I need to figure this out. And that part of me that said, you really do need to share this with people, that began. Now, I didn't share it too publicly at that point, but I became very passionate about it. I started working with other people, just giving this away, doing these recordings. I would listen for what we hear, but also I'd use my mind's eye to see if I could see any people. And sometimes, I'd heard a message from somebody's little sister, and then I saw a picture in my brain, and then the man would pull out a picture and it would be the same person. I thought, oh my gosh. So my heart was now wide open, thinking the afterlife is real, and this makes a difference to people and helps them with their grief. But if I can continue.
Yes.
What happened was my humanity, my ego, whatever, convinced me that, who am I to tell this story? I'm not an expert in anything. I didn't have a book written or anything. Why would people believe me? And I was so busy working that I strategically, I guess, just kind of forgot about this side of myself. And every so often I would read a book or something, but, I kept having these things happen, that I'd meet people that were severely grieving or experienced some loss. And, I'd think, gosh, I should tell them my story, but then I was too afraid. So fast forward now to 2010, my dad gets diagnosed with cancer, and he ends up dying 5 months later. And in that time, I was my dad's biggest champion. I relocated to be by his side. But there was all kinds of stress and arguments between my siblings and I, and we became one of those families that you read about that, it all goes bad. And Dad ended up passing May 11th, 2010. The relationship with my siblings was severed. So not only did they cast me out, but I could no longer see my nieces and nephews. And it was really bad. I got to what I would call rock bottom. I was not anticipating or considering ending my own life, but I had that moment that I said, you know what, this is what people feel like that do. You really feel like there's no option in life. There's as bad as one could feel, you feel. But then this kind of light bulb went off in my brain going, you've never been this person before. What is grief? Why do we grieve? Why does it hurt so bad? And so my passion, instead of studying the afterlife, was looking into grief. And Heather, I found out that our brain chemistry changes when we grieve. Even tears that we cry when we're grieving aren't the same chemical makeup as our normal tears. And I found out that we all have these what's called neurotransmitters. You hear of things like dopamine and serotonin and all these things. And I compare it to a car. Cars have different gasoline and oil and windshield wiper fluid and power steering fluid. Well, we have these neurotransmitters. And when we go through the shock, we go through grief, we are depleted of these. And in that, very often people's memory isn't there, their communication center of their brain doesn't work. We are talking a lot, sleeping a lot, not sleeping. I mean, we go into haywire. And this may be a poor comparison, but when you think of somebody who's addicted to some kind of a drug and then they get it taken away, you're not going to trust them with your bank ATM PIN number, right? And everything you have. And I think when we're grieving, we got to have the same compassion for people that they're in an unhealthy body and they don't know it. And it takes a while to readjust. And so I ended up finding out some things that not only help people feel better, but to move through the grieving process. Certainly the pain is there. But then I started realizing that what I learned about the afterlife, how it helped me. I ended up meeting this Reverend Rita and got a reading from her. And she brought in details about my dad and drew a picture of him, like, oh my gosh. So I started feeling like this is my duty to share what I know. I created an audio called How to Survive Grief. I posted that online on Facebook at the time. Didn't have too many friends, but it seemed to go viral. And people responded. Not only did it help them through grief, but then Heather, people responded that they chose not to end their lives because of my words. And so it wasn't too long after that as, I call them miracles. I met a publisher, pitched my story, wrote my book. It was on a fast forward to get printed. And the book's just 10 years old now. And it talks about my journey, reasons that I had to believe in the afterlife as of 10 years ago. And, that was all great. And like yourself, I wanted to experience more and share more. So I started recording interviews with people, not knowing how to do a podcast. And it started out just being audios, and now it's video interviews. And I created We Don't Die Radio. That's now over 400 episodes. And this side of myself that is passionate about the afterlife, wants to help people through grief. And most importantly, if we don't die, what is our life for? Who are we? How to have a powerful life, that came about. And here I am. Yes, we lost our business when COVID hit in 2020. But I think if I look from God or the universe or a higher power, it's just like, there's a lot of suffering on planet Earth. Let's take this girl who never believed in it. Let's give her a voice. And so, yes, I've been asked by iHeartRadio to have a show on their network, which has hundreds of thousands of listeners now, which is crazy. It's called Shades of the Afterlife.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it's like I'm a reporter for the afterlife, basically. So I talk about different things on every episode. And now I'm over 150 episodes on that. So I have given my life. I truly have. Like many of the guests that you talk about and you talk to on your show, that I've made my life about service. And if I can tell my story and then share other people's stories, and if it can make a difference for you in your life, that's who I am. That's who I am.
And your book is called We Don't Die. And I believe you have a chapter that is just on grief. And I think that's so important that you address that. And I really find that interesting what you talk about with the chemical changes, because whether it's losing a loved one, or maybe it's losing a job, or maybe it's just some other hardship that you have going on in your life, maybe it's past trauma that you're getting through. A lot of people go through grief. And I think people that are often around them just say, well, just get over it, snap out of it. But when you have those physical changes, it's not just getting over that mental and emotional hurdle. It's the physical as well.
It's out of our control for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a good 4 years after the death of my dad to feel like I'm back. It seemed like there was a dark cloud over me. And no matter what I knew, no matter what I did, that cloud followed. And then all of a sudden one day I thought, hey, I'm back. So it's a different journey for each and every person. It's not as easy as just wishing it away or thinking you should be able to get through it. I want to give a gift to all of your audience. If you go to my website, which is WeDon'tDie.com, and you're bold enough to give me your email address, there's a little pop-up that says you'll get the first few chapters of my book. The secret is it's the entire book. Mm. So you'll be able to get chapter 10 and read that and have all the information that I have. because grief is a killer. There's a lot of people that end their own lives. And they want to join their loved ones because they're experiencing grief. And there's something I talk about. I think I call it the garbage truck, because your brain can give you such negative thinking, and you convince yourself that that's your voice who's saying that, but it's not you. It's just a byproduct of not living in a healthy brain at the moment. And people said, Sandra, it's like, what I'm thinking. And it's like, yeah, it's because that's what we all think. The more we love, the more grief hurts. So on one hand, kudos to us for loving. And I know when I interviewed you, we talked about how important love is. But then the flip side of that is how hard the grief is.
Absolutely. And that's so generous of you to give that book away. And I have to say that recently I was trying to buy the Kindle version of your book, and somehow my Amazon card is having trouble with me getting audiobooks and Kindle books. So I wasn't able to get it. So now I know that I can go to your website. So that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, and if you like audiobooks, on WeDon'tDie.com, go to the store page. You'll find the audiobook.
I do like audiobooks.
And just use coupon code FREE, and you can listen to it as well.
That is so nice of you. And that just shows,
why not?
it just shows that, when you learn about these things, I feel like it changes people. People just become so loving and giving. And obviously you're doing that for so many people, and you're helping so many people. And I have a lot of questions for you, because you've been interviewing a variety of people. You said how many you had, I think 400 episodes and more than that. And so, we've got, you've had so many interesting guests. So I want to talk more about the afterlife and some of the things that you've heard from your guests, but let's go ahead and take that into part 2.
Thanks so much for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. That was part 1. Make sure to listen to part 2. And if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more episodes.